I speak a lot out and about, and a lot to churches, and a lot in black churches, a lot in Protestant churches, a lot in Catholic churches, where I sort of grew up. But this conference, who does, in my judgment, the most to press back against Dr. King's worry that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning remains the most segregated hour in the United States. You are shining beacon in antidote to that massive worry. I'm honored, too, to be in front of such a substantial crew of godly folk, being asked to say a word, not to bring a word, but to say a word. I could list a very substantial number of Dominican priests who would be astonished that I would be asked to speak to any religious convocation whatsoever. And you could add to them maybe an even larger listing of Virginia politicians who would be stunned to know that we are breaking bread, or that I'd be asked to speak to any religious organization, even a squishy one like yours. But I'm delighted to join you, even if fundamentally undeserving, and I should say existentially undeserving. I'm glad to have an important topic to talk about, the challenge of poverty in North Carolina. If you picked up Rick's introduction, I have spent most all of the last 25 years as either president of a university or a law school dean. I was surprised during that long period of time how frequently in those jobs you're called upon not to speak on important matters, but to give what I came to think of as warm and mindless remarks. You know, where you try to touch the heartstrings and maybe the pocketbooks of various friends and alumni of your respective institutions, never to say anything strident or challenging or important or worth listening to. I was surprised how big a part of the job of being a university president the giving of warm and mindless remarks was. I was even more surprised, though, when my faculty colleagues started saying with near unanimity that I was really very good at giving warm and mindless remarks, that I was something of a natural for it. So this is warning that this morning, just for half an hour, I'm going to depart from my usual habits and what are apparently my stronger skills. But if in about 15 minutes I forget myself and start asking you for money, please forgive me. Old habits die hard. Though my instincts tell me this may be a dry hole on that front. I don't know. I was also thinking this. That's right. I was talking to a couple folks outside, and they indicated that they'd read some things that I had written, and that I don't look exactly like they expected me to look. Now, I hear this a bit as I travel around. At first, I took it as a compliment. I thought that maybe I don't look as arrogant or as nerdy as is generally called upon in my line of work, but I gradually came to understand people were actually just saying that I'm a lot bigger than they ever expected a law school dean to look. I explained this to my wife of 30 years, and she said with great kindness, I'm sure, that I'm a lot bigger than she ever expected me to look either. So you are in good company. It is true also, as Rick said, that I played football at Oklahoma State. I was a philosophy major, which means that I had two very distinct sets of friends. One set, they were almost all from India, and they weighed about 78 pounds, and we spent our time talking about ahimsa and other things. And the other group averaged about 330 pounds, and as far as I could tell, spoke no ascertainable language whatsoever. So I'm used to running in different crowds. It's also true, I grew up in Mesquite, Texas, and went to Oklahoma State. I was introduced at something last year, and the judge said it was only because I had grown up in Mesquite, Texas, that I could have considered Oklahoma State to be an institution of higher learning. I reject that. I reject that. Now, it'll surprise you to hear that I have something I'm going to talk about. The challenge of our economic inequities. You know, in a broad sense, the statistics of poverty, but it's worth saying just a word about them as we start. In this, the richest nation on earth, we have more people living in poverty this morning than at any moment in our long history. More people in the United States, more people in North Carolina, more people in Alamance County, more people in Orange County than ever before in our nation's long story, more on a percentage basis than at any time in over 30 years. 18% of us, 1.7 million in North Carolina, about a third of all blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans, over a quarter of all of our children, and an astounding 40%, 4 out of 10, of our children of color. A simple declarative sentence that shames us as a people. The richest nation on earth, 40% of our children of color live in wrenching poverty. Those are poverty numbers, especially child poverty numbers, that are far greater, this is not widely understood, I think, but far greater than any other advanced democracy in the world. Of the 34 or 35 advanced industrial democracies that make up most of the international studies, only 3 have child poverty rates and poverty rates more generally, which are equivalent to ours: Chile, Turkey, and Mexico. We have greater gaps between rich and poor than any advanced nation. In fact, we have greater income disparity, gaps between rich and poor, than almost any nation in the world, advanced or what have you. Among the entire community of nations, to find our peer in inequality, you have to speed past, of course, all the European nations, all of the New World counterparts. You've got to speed past India, speed past China, where in the last year they have rioted over income inequality, down to our good colleagues at the bottom of the list: Cameroon, Madagascar, Rwanda, Uganda, and Ecuador. Our brothers in parity. And it's worth saying we gather, as perspective, we gather in the South, the native home of American poverty, where we have more poor people and more political leaders who are utterly untroubled by it than the rest of the land. 10 of our country's poorest 12 states are Southern, though about 15% of Americans live in poverty in general. In Mississippi, it's 23%, Louisiana, 23%, Arkansas, 21%, Georgia, 20%, South Carolina, 19%, Texas, 19%, North Carolina, as I said, 18%. The former Confederate states set the gold standard when it comes to American economic deprivation. We also lead the nation in those without health care coverage of any kind. Here, Texas paves the way with an astonishing 27%. But Louisiana, Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, and North Carolina are close behind, all giving the Longhorns a spirited run. Rick Perry, I'm sure, is proud. To add insult to injury, a few weeks ago, the Pew Foundation released a new study of economic mobility. And it said that the states with the lowest economic mobility, where if you're born poor, you're going to stay poor, and if you're born wealthy, you're going to stay that way, they were Louisiana, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi, North Carolina, and Texas. So you get the point. Still, oddly, those very states, our region, are the ones that most are strongly opposed to stimulus funding, to health care reform, to the expansion of Medicaid. We would benefit the most from those programs by far, but we reject them. We express great outrage to them. I suppose it's possible that it's not the right ones of us which would benefit. Now that's a mouthful. I know it is demoralizing. It's depressing. It bums you out. I didn't mean to start with hard blows. But I don't want you to think it's all bad news. There is a different lens, a different cast. I read in the New York Times just a few weeks ago that Gucci high-end sales last year rose by over 26%. Yves Saint Laurent came in close behind at 23. BMW more than doubled last year its quarterly profits. Sales of BMW's S-Class sedan that apparently cost over $200,000 an automobile jumped by 16%. Porsche's overall marker in the last 6 months improved by a mere 59%. Saks Fifth Avenue's full-year net income rose by 57%. Sadly, there is some tragedy buried here. Neiman Marcus flatly sold out nationwide of something called Christian Louboutin Bianca platform pumps at $1,200 a pair. Now, I may have pronounced that wrong. I asked my wife, and thank Jesus, she didn't know how to pronounce it either. But in the same report, it indicated Walmart had to stop selling, or had to start selling smaller packages because its shoppers didn't have enough cash on hand to buy multi-packs of toilet paper. The Census Bureau reported last month that of all the increase in income in the United States last year, 93% went to the top 1%. The bottom 99% got about $70 a year. The richest 400 of us, now let me be clear on that, I didn't say 400,000, 400 million. The richest 400 people have more wealth than the bottom 150 millions put together. And to remind, all this occurs in the nation that brags the most in its Declaration of Independence, its Constitution, its daily pledges of allegiance, brags the most about equality and justice and dignity for all, brags the most and does the least. 3 undisputable facts lie at the core and the vortex of American poverty. Here they are, indisputable. No one would challenge these. First, this is the richest nation on earth. Second, we have the highest poverty rate of any advanced nation. Third, Americans believe and profess daily that this is the fairest, most egalitarian, most committed to liberty and justice for all of any country ever visited on this planet. You can square a lot of things. We're on a great university. I come from a great university. If you've got a nimble mind, you can square a lot of things that collide, but not those 3. You can't be the richest, the poorest, and the fairest all at once. In truth, we've allowed ourselves to become the richest, the poorest, and the most unequal nation in the world. How do we do it? How do we manage those 3 conflicting perceptions? I want to talk to you about that a little bit. I think most powerfully, we do it by relentlessly and intentionally, pervasively, defensively, and tragically rendering poverty invisible in our broader lives. We turn our gaze away from those locked at the bottom of American life. We sort of twist our neck and look at more congenial territory. It's my hope, I'm here because I hope that we together can help to turn that gaze back through engagement, through activism, through narrative, through presenting the flesh and blood of poverty in North Carolina. How do you do that? Well, it's hard to say. But I know one thing that won't work, and that's tougher on me than it is on many of you because I'm an academic. We do reports for a living. But it is not going to happen through data and statistics and trends and averages and analyses. What difference does it make if a state has 8% poverty or 28% poverty? It makes a gigantic difference. But if you are adamant to ignore it, they're all just numbers. The one is the same as the other. But as you know, poverty isn't a number. It's not a number in North Carolina. It's not a number in the United States. In this bountiful nation, it is a determined exclusion, a willful marginalization, a draining of the body, a wound to the soul, a wound that in the richest nation on earth has to be rendered plain and unignorable. Now, we've been trying to do this in the last year or so, principally partnering with our good colleagues at the state NAACP under the remarkable leadership of Dr. Barber, taking journalists and funders and politicians and activists and international agencies, nonprofits, students, professors, ministers into communities and circumstances in North Carolina that they've likely never seen. What we have witnessed demeans us all as Tar Heels, as Americans, as Christians and Jews, as Muslims and Hindus. It has stunned us all, even those who work every day in the vineyard. I've accustomed myself to the reality and the hope in its continuation that I will never get over it. It'll be the pasture in which I work, as long as I can put one foot in front of another. I can't capture it for you. I wish I could. I am no James Agee. But there are hints from these communities, hints that are every bit as powerfully revealed in your own, that are strong enough that I'm emboldened to share some of them with you. Hints in the exploding food banks in Ahoskie, North Carolina, with embarrassed, employed, first-time users so desperate to get food for their kids that they camp out all night long, midwinter, to get that early spot in line, fearful that otherwise their children will starve. Hence in the homeless shelters of Elizabeth City, with the total citywide of 26 beds, making tough work for 400 homeless women and men in Pasquotank County. Or hence in meetings with healthcare workers in Rocky Mount, who expressed that they bend the rules to put oxygen in their patients' homes so that it is tougher under state law for electric companies to cut off power to their impoverished and incapacitated clients. Or the 70-year-old woman in Winton who drives a school bus every day, morning and afternoon, to get enough money to pay for the food and medicine and care essential for her stroke-disabled husband. You've seen her. She is of the lazy poor. And the daughter in Wilson who frets for her 62-year-old father with heart disease, who can't get in to see a doctor unless he can scrape together the $400 that he owes and he has no prospects for. So she fears every day the specter of the call, and we struggle with trying to figure out whose burden was larger, hers or his. Or the hopeful young, brilliant black woman from Halifax County who graduated from Carolina, did everything right, came home, couldn't find work, lost her housing, and now fears that she's losing the more important battle to convince her young son against peer pressure that going to school is worthwhile after all, because he says, you can't show it by what's happened to you, Mom. Or the 30-year-old woman from Coleraine who 2 years ago now lost her husband, her aunt, and her house in a flash of the tornadoes. And since she couldn't afford insurance, she now lives in financial as well as personal ruin. Or our Latino sisters and brothers working across eastern North Carolina, back-breaking hours in the fields for $45 a day, except on those days which are not insubstantial, in which they get nothing, because their employer's business plan calls for them to steal their wages. Or in Fayetteville, maybe most shocking to all of us, veteran after veteran, over 400 by official count, fresh from our nation's many battlefields, homeless, living under the bridges skirting town in a new use for the interstate highway system. Or poor black communities in Brunswick County, from which we've just returned this week, surrounded by toxic Superfund sites, literally killing families, leaving kids with a legacy of poison and pestilence after the businesses have withdrawn, making me wonder as an old lawyer whether in fact we need an Endangered Species Act for poor black communities in North Carolina. The thousands of young men with some form of criminal record who have served their sentences and are desperate to go to work, but are flatly barred from employment and from housing and even from food stamps, thanks to President Clinton, so that they ask, exactly what path is it that we are expected now to take? Or at the beloved community center in Greensboro, where folks line up at 3:30 in the morning to get a shower when the doors eventually open at 6, where 4 homeless clients died on the streets in a single week during the winter before we came to town. Or just down the road at Greensboro Urban Ministries, where 500 meals are served 3 times a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and they can't meet the demand. Unsurprisingly, you probably haven't heard this, but Greensboro and High Point having the 2nd highest food insecurity in the entire country. Or in Charlotte. Now, you might think that would be a political issue in North Carolina rather than a silent one, especially if you represented Greensboro. Might that be an issue of concern? Apparently not. Or in Charlotte, in the literal towers, the shadows of the banking towers, the bailed out banking towers, where the 2nd highest increase in family homelessness in America was recorded 2 years ago. Hundreds line up at crisis ministries for food and services, many working, many with kids, some of them vets, living in invisible desperation in North Carolina's richest city. And I can report this, they were nowhere to be found during the Democratic convention. Or in Hickory, where Reverend Barber and I walked a few hundred yards into the woods to find families, many veterans, many working, often with kids, over 120 souls, living in dilapidated tents and cardboard shanties, till they get chased away by the police, who slice up their tents, their only possessions, as deterrent. Down the road from sprawling mansions, in a tale that Dickens wouldn't have the imagination or the gall to invent. Or in East Spencer, a small, ancient, mostly black town where 40% of residents live in poverty. No library, no school, no grocery store, what the scholars call a food desert. Though the national corporation headquarters of Food Lion is lodged just over the bridge, 700 yards away in Salisbury. And a massive food distribution center is located smack in the middle of town, sending food all over the United States, stuffed with goodies everywhere except down the street in the community where it resides. Or in Hendersonville, where in a police chase for an unarmed black man, over 50 bullets were fired by law enforcement officers into half a dozen houses, even the church itself, where if a grandmother and her 4-year-old granddaughter hadn't hit the deck quickly enough, shots coming through the window would have killed them. Something that we all know would never happen in a white neighborhood. So that the mother would cry when they shot into all those houses, they wounded our whole community because they said our lives didn't matter. And how else could it be understood? And for me, what would be a perfect allegory, except I looked this up, and allegory is required to be untrue. It's the disabled, impoverished, homeless man trying to silently protest in Winston-Salem on the corner that he claims as his own when President Obama came to town. But the Secret Service moved him, of course, blocks away so that the president wouldn't have to see him. Edited out of the field of vision, deleted from our family portrait that disappeared. Not to be counted, obviously, not to be aided, not to be given a more meaningful chance, but most importantly, not to be seen. Not to be seen in Raleigh, not to be seen in Washington. And to be honest, this all was true before January 1, when the North Carolina legislature declared open war on poor people. Before, despite everything I have just told you, all those statistics, all those narratives, our leaders have effectively announced that the only thing wrong with North Carolina is that those at the bottom have too much and those at the top don't have enough. So that we would reject a Medicaid expansion that would benefit us more than virtually any state in the United States, over 500,000 needy citizens, you all know this, ejected from the health care system. Though the feds were ready to foot essentially the whole bill, we opted to let hundreds die, and that's exactly what will happen, to prove that we are capable of being more cruel than the rest, ideology trumping even life itself. We cut unemployment insurance dramatically in a way that forfeited federal funds already appropriated, already on the table, coldly brushing aside that money. A bumbling committee chairwoman explained that she'd been working on changes for weeks and she didn't want to have to go back and redo things to get the federal money. It's too much trouble. After all, it's just food and sustenance and housing that'll be lost in a couple weeks, 10 days, for 170,000 immensely distressed Tar Heels. We ended the state's exceedingly modest earned income tax credit, reflecting the inspiring present premise that the only taxes eligible to be raised are those of working families making about $35,000 a year. 900,000 low-income Tar Heels will pay a higher tax bill next year so that 120 or so immensely wealthy families can be excused from an estate tax. We're now going to expand the sales tax in more encompassing ways to groceries and drugs and cut income taxes accordingly under the overt premise that it's important for poor people to pay more and rich people to pay less. Deeper cuts are coming in order to pay for reductions in the corporate income tax. We're reintroducing payday lending, long outlawed here, to help wealthy folks steal more readily from poor ones. Poor people, on the other hand, are to get humiliating drug tests before they get TANF funds. An indignity that the legislature saved itself from in its own public funded benefits, nor, I will attest, do the students in Chapel Hill have to get drug tests before they pick up financial aid checks. That would be an interesting outcome. And when, as you know, when Tar Heels protest these measures, we are called outside agitators by the governor and morons by the legislative leadership. By this crew that has announced on the floor of the General Assembly that there are no poor people in North Carolina. I wouldn't be challenging anyone's intellect after I said that. And where the entirety of the legislative agenda comes out of some entity called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which I looked yesterday and it lists its address as Crystal Drive, Arlington, Virginia. Outside influence. So we have a priorities problem in North Carolina, a moral problem, a constitutional problem, a legal problem, or a religious problem. We have had it for decades. It is not that we can't afford to treat poor and low-income folks better. We choose not to, and I think we know it. You'll forgive me, I think, for reminding that Lyndon Johnson said, we may not know everything, but we know the difference between chicken shit and chicken salad. Now, and I think we've known it for a long, long time. It's like Mrs. Hamer says, we are sick and tired of being sick and tired. Lyndon Johnson wasn't always crass. Well, he was always crass, but I spent much of my youth, like a lot of you did, protesting Johnson. He horrified in war. He was a big, complicated, inconsistent, hypocritical, boisterous, larger-than-life Texan. I'm from Mesquite, Texas. He sort of hollered at you and sweat all over you. I don't know why I'm drawn to him. But he also taught that American poverty touches our personal conscience and our national mission. Johnson said this, rarely in any time does an issue lay bare the secret heart of America itself. Rarely are we met with a challenge not to our growth or our abundance or our security, but to the values and purposes and meaning of our beloved nation. And should we defeat every enemy, and should we double our wealth and conquer the stars, and be unequal to this task, then we will have failed as a people and as a nation. For with a country, as with a person, what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his soul? What is he profited? Amen. So that, starkly put, is our challenge. What increasingly becomes the struggle for our soul as a people. We could wish it weren't as imposing or as lonely or as uphill or as unappreciated as it is. We could wish there weren't such powerful forces arrayed against it, or even if so many not arrayed against it, who are willing to dispose of it, to cast it aside. But sometimes under daunting challenge, it's helpful to think of those who have gone before. I'm guessing that Fannie Lou Hamer didn't do an opinion poll before she started the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Rosa Parks didn't conduct a focus group before she sat down for freedom. I'm pretty sure that Cesar Chavez didn't ask if this would be convenient or lauded or praised when he launched his famous hunger strike. He said instead, si se puede. This is not the first time that people in this land and people in this room have been asked to fight for justice against the odds. So I hope we'll recommit ourselves to it, to a higher form of obligation, believing as God's children that we are all in this together, that there can be no excuse in the richest nation on earth, the richest nation in human history, talking relentlessly about equal opportunity and dignity and doing so little to make that idle promise real. I hope we'll subscribe to it. We'll declare our commitment. We'll enroll our hearts, or we'll re-enlist our spirits. We'll enlist because somewhere we read, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal. And somewhere we read of one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And somewhere we read that history will judge us on the extent to which we've used our gifts to lighten and enrich the lives of our fellows. And somewhere, of course, we read that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And think about this. Somewhere we read we ought to believe the things we teach our children. Imagine that. Believe them and make them real. And somewhere we read that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I know that every person in this room read, whenever you did these things for the least of these, you did them for me. And that same group read, you weep what you sow. And somewhere we read that the pursuit of justice and the pursuit of happiness can be as one. They march not in opposite directions, but hand in hand. And somewhere we read, no, we are not satisfied. And we will not be satisfied till justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Thank you very much.